This is just a short video I wanted to do on apex geometry and how I think quite often when I'm talking with people, the concept of a convex edge, whether it applies to a convex as the entire knife or just a small bevel or a micro bevel, is often misunderstood when you look at how people talk about them. And so I want to just convey visually the intent behind why I like convex edges and also why it may not have any relevance to you, and could be a personal preference, what you like, what you find too easy to sharpen. So we're just going to start with a basic, what would be interpreted as a full zero ground V. Whether you treat this as the entire knife or just say as the last 5 millimeters of the knife down to the apex, doesn't really matter. The principle applies right throughout. Um, but we could just treat this for this discussion as being, say, your secondary bevel, which might be 20 thousandths thick here. If you just have a straight V edge, what can happen is it's quite thick here, but it gets very, very thin down here, and that very small thinness might be too fine an angle to handle the type of work you're cutting. If this was a full fat ground knife, for example, and that was only 3 DPS, it's too weak and fragile, it's going to roll over and bend. So the first thing we tend to do as knife makers is say, well, let's thicken up the knife and give it more stability on the edge. So instead of taking it all the way down, we make the sides thicker and we add a secondary bevel facet like this, which is thicker and more robust. So of course down here where it matters, we've got extra material. And an important concept to understand is that the flexibility of the steel, the rigidity, the stiffness, is measured through thickness cubed. So if you take any point here and you measure here, cube it, measure here and cube it, and divide the bigger one by the smaller, you'll work out the percentage. How much stiffer is this small portion? And what you'll find is that even very small increments can make a huge difference. But let's go back to here. So the idea is that we thicken up the edge with the secondary bevel. Now what happens with a lot of factory knives is they do this and err on the side of the caution. They make it very, very thick. A lot of this is because, of course, it's much cheaper and easier with machinery to make a thicker piece of steel. Heat treating, dealing with damage and grinding thin is harder. So if you make this nice and thick, you've made it very, very stable and you're not going to get complaints. But what you're doing and what everyone knows has happened is the performance of the cutting has been reduced. So the next common thing that people would do is say, well, how can we improve the performance of this? We could lower the edge angle of this and make it thinner again, but then all you're doing if you make this thinner is getting closer and closer to this weakness point. One simple thing a lot of people do is say, well, if I just knock this shoulder off here, this widest peak across here, then we can still have the edge stable but make it easier for the knife to cut through. So what we do is we end up cutting the corners off, knocking the shoulders off, I call it, with sandpaper or a file, putting a facet here. Now some people would do this on sandpaper and ended up with it curving. Some people just take a stone and end up with a flat facet just like this. And we end up with something looking like this now. So what we've done is we've said, well, it's still really stable down here, it's pretty thick, but I've thinned it down in this part and this part because that was easy to do. It didn't take a lot of effort, and this is going to have quite a good boost to how good the performance of the cutting will be. It's now going to cut into things easier, but this edge is quite stable still. Because one of the things we have to consider is when you're going to damage your knife, how much damage is it going to get? You've got to work out what's the depth of the damage. So if the depth of the damage that you're testing with a really, really thin knife, like the original, without any thickness, is only up to this blue line, then only thickening up to that blue line is going to help you in a large way with that type of damage you're getting. All this extra is not really facilitating that. So we knock the shoulder off. And what happens is people knock the shoulders off and go, wow, this is really cutting good. And hey, my edge is exactly the same thickness as it was before. It's just as durable, but now it's cutting better. Let's take a little bit further. Let's add some more facets. Let's knock off some more shoulders. So we end up something like this, where each different coloured line represents a different little flat facet done on a stone. It's still just as thick down here, but we've just kept off knocking some shoulders, getting thinner and thinner and thinner, so that now our performance is actually really close to the original, but we've got that thicker edge down here. And that leads us really to getting to a convex, which is just taking that and cleaning it up, blending it all in really, really smoothly so that you're getting a nice cutting surface where it transitions through the material as easily as possible, but still with the thickness down here. That thickness that we wanted to gain from the secondary bevel, right down here when we keep on zooming in, we want to retain that just down here. We've got to work out where's the damage, and from the damage point up we want to reduce through the convex. And whether it's a convex or a secondary grind or 3 grinds or 5 grinds, a convex is just infinite numbers of facets. You're just taking it and leaning it all up. So it's the end result of saying, let's knock it down, knock it down, knock it down, where what you want to get is the best solution between the two options, which that's too thin, that's the best it could ever be, that's strong enough but it's too thick, and the convex is just that man in the middle that gives us the perfect blend between the two. Now, of course, a convex can be a lot of effort for a lot of people to maintain, which is why rather than a convex, a lot of people will just opt for, hey, let's just knock a couple of shoulders off and thin this down, maybe knock a bit more steel off here and get that perfect blend. And that's fine, but to me as a knife maker, the convex does what it's supposed to do, which is put the stability where it's supposed to be, which is get it stable at the bottom and thin down in a nice relative curve to get the highest performance cut through on material. Where it fails, of course, is that it comes down to the knife maker knowing what they're doing. And the problem is that if you have someone who's not really understanding how everything works and starts doing a convex like this at the bottom, where it just bears no relationship to the original type of grind you're after. And what we want to work out is how much steel do you really need to have thick and how much can be thin, and getting the right blend between that. And that's where a knife user will get experience and a knife maker will have experience. But too thin it fails, too thick it doesn't. A convex is just the cleanest transition between it, if not necessarily the easiest to comprehend. But it is really just faceting. Faceting until the facets are so small that you don't notice them anymore. Now, as part of trying to work out how much damage you've taken, I've been working on a spreadsheet that I'm going to share on Cliff's forum, make it easy for people to read. This is from a video I did 7 or 8 years ago, which was geometry under the microscope, and demonstrating by ripping a knife on a steel ceramic hone and taking the edge off and showing how small the actual level of damage is required to make a knife dull and not sharp, that bit that you want to protect and stiffen up, and showing it here. And of course this big black dot here is that tiny dot there. So the damage is in 0.1 of a millimeter, actually a hundredth of a millimeter. It's tiny. So I was building up a chart to sort of show how you can work out for your apex what angles are going to be good, what do you need to stabilize it, understanding the concept of the stiffness of steel and how much it enhances stability. So I was creating a chart here that is easy and simple to read by angles. So if you just want to flat grind V edges, don't want to even worry about convex, and say if I was at a 10 dps edge and it's failing, how many degrees do I need to change? And if you go from a 10 degree edge to a 15 degree edge, you have 350% more rigidity. If you go to a 30-degree edge from a 10-degree edge, you've got 3,500% greater rigidity. But that doesn't mean you need to make a 30 dps secondary bevel on your knife that goes up to 20 thou. If you want that level of stability, you only need to deal with it at this height. Put a micro bevel on. You only need that 30 dps to be down to this level here at about 0.01 millimeter. You know, a 20th of the size of that dot. And there from straight up you can go to your 10 degrees or whatever. That was nice and thin for cutting performance. So this chart's just to help people play with that and understand, going from any angle to another angle, what you're losing or what you're gaining. And I hope that helps people.